For those listening at home, once again, Clayton Thompson, and I actually decided to do a second podcast because I get obsessed with things, and I have ADHD, and that's tight. So this is my good friend Emilio. Emilio and I have actually never met. We've been longtime internet buddies for, I don't know, 2 years, 3 years.
Probably two, close to three, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so it's cool to meet somebody, not in the flesh, but Emilio's been where were you? Were you at CSU Pueblo when
I
we first
was
started talking?
yeah, CSU Pueblo, finishing my last year, yeah.
That's tight. And you're obviously a pitcher. How hard you throw? I forget.
Topped 89,
Let's
sat
go.
87.
But then you went and worked for Trenton. How hard you threw 90? I
I
saw a
did
video
throw
out there.
I did throw 90. I think I got up to like 90.9. That was it. Hardest
90.9.
hardest I ever thrown 90.9, just barely below sucking.
All right, okay. So if you were throwing as a coach, how do you feel about coaches having to throw hard and to be a good coach? Where's your take on that?
I guess that's hard, is like fuck, dude. I don't know. Experience is so beneficial in so many things, so it's hard to discredit it. But like I think about a guy like so if you think about like a guy like Travis Mash, and he has like hip surgeries, going through some of like the health issues and stuff. If he's still not performing, even though he may have in the past, still not performing now, obviously he is now after surgeries and stuff. But like when he was kind of like taking a break from all the training and stuff, are you still going to like listen to him? Probably, you know. And I think that's like the hard part for me is like, I don't know if it matters. I think it gave me a lot of insight, but I don't know if it matters, if that makes sense. Like, I don't know
Yeah,
if I don't really know if I understood the throw better throwing 1.2 miles an hour harder than my top in a game, right? Or if
yeah,
it was everything going through that, where like I probably learned more throwing 85 than I did hitting my 90. If that, I don't know, like it's more like the experience based stuff, like conversations with people, having a better understanding of internal dialogue, separating what I used to view as cues and constraints versus what really, were cues and constraints that I just never thought about.
yeah,
Um, which I guess once again like comes from throwing, but also I think I had a really big advantage at least going into tread because I was so new from playing versus like most people that were there. Like some people were off like pro ball season, some were still trying to pursue it and things like that. But I think I just our coach forced us to play. We didn't really do a lot of mechanical stuff, good and bad. Just not really going to talk about that theory or whatever. But I at least had the remembrance of like what training was supposed to be about. And I think that was probably the most impactful thing of like what I view as a coach is like you can get into so many environments and just kind of forget what the fuck the goal is about.
yeah. I mean, so I obviously had this argument on Twitter with Chase Van Dyke, and he was saying that he needed to throw hard to get his guys to buy in to his program because he doesn't have the coaching background experience. And I think if that's your opinion, like I like dude, like connect with your players, like talk with them, like help them understand why they're doing things. Like that's a much better approach to like having to train for 3 to 4 hours. I mean, okay, like you should like me if you want to throw, like you can still throw, but like if that's your excuse, like I need these guys to buy in because they'll see me throwing hard and then want to do my program. Like either write a better program, tell them why they're doing their program because people who don't do stuff generally don't know why they're doing things. It's like when I was 4, my mom used to tell me to take out trash or do a dumb chore. I always used to say no and then throw a temper tantrum. And then my mom, like a really good mom, would just go, Clayton, if you don't do this, I can't do this for dinner. And then I'd just be like, okay, that makes sense. I want to eat food. This is to help me eat food. Like this is good. This is I can obviously see the connection here, and then I go to do it. So I don't think that there's like a prerequisite, like, oh, you need to throw this hard. Like, yes, it's definitely good to have like prior throwing experience. Like if you've never thrown a baseball before, it'll be really hard to coach. Like there's no way like I don't throw 90, I won't be a good coach. Like that's no.
No, I mean, dude, like, um, I guess I think of two names right now that kind of come to mind. Nick Zappala, uh,
Dude, dog. Dog, I love
right?
that guy.
But like when Nick was kind of helping me, he was really the first big influence I had in training when he was at Pueblo. And like he just would talk to me about stuff. I would learn a lot from him. It's like I never listened to him because he threw hard. Like he threw hard and he was gross, but I didn't listen to him because of that. It was almost like when you know someone has an innate passion and care for something, you are more willing, I feel like, to be like, okay, maybe he doesn't have everything figured out, but like I know he's gonna arrive to some conclusion that I won't because he's gonna be in the fucking like trenches trying to figure something out. And like that peace of mind is probably a little bit better for me listening to people rather than like any accolade based reasoning for it.
Yeah.
Um, like he's definitely like the biggest one of the biggest influences I can see from that lens is like, yeah, he was nasty, but I never viewed him being good as to why I would listen to him. It's like, once again, explain some methodology stuff, having the passion to be like very, very bought into why he was doing things. Not that his way was the best way, but like in his mind, why it's not his way is the best way. But where I kind of took something from my own coaching is like, and kind of going full circle on being on social media now, dude, you can know very little, but as long as it fits within your system of coaching and you coach it really fucking well, right? People buy into your system because it's the way you operate. It's that blending, I guess, of like the artistic viewpoint of how you can approach training versus having something like the principle based stuff behind it from any of the research science, experience based stuff you've already done, right? People buy into a system, they don't necessarily
Yeah.
buy in. I don't know. I guess it's hard to say. It's like,
It's like Lance Wheeler. It's like Lance Wheeler owns the pelvis. Like I'm pretty
sure,
sure
yeah,
like if somebody had a pelvis issue and no one else could solve it, like I'm pretty sure like you would call Lance Wheeler, no matter your thoughts on him at all.
sure,
Like that's probably the guy that you would, he owns that shit. And
yeah,
he gets people to sign up with him. And that, depending on your take, that's for better or for worse. But Lance
yeah. No,
Lance
it doesn't matter. It's you're correct. You're correct. Is
yeah,
like you just kind of go and like I think of even something like, and I don't want to throw shade or anything right now, but it's like like Jake Tura, big tendon guy, right? It's like
huge.
anytime he posts, I don't really know what he's talking about in terms of like the depth of when he goes into a lot of the stuff. But like if I have any sort of I don't think of him. Everyone loves the vertical jump protocol and I heard hypertrophy clusters protocol, right? Like the ebook stuff.
Yeah.
I think like, dude, both really fun programs. I've ran them. In my viewpoint, do I think that is the best way to elicit hypertrophy? No. Do I think it's a sick program? Yes. So I'm not saying
Yeah.
like Jake.
And I mean, yeah, and Jake's programs aren't for the how to get the biggest and best guys. It's like if you're a nobody and you want to spend $30, here's a quick and easy way to get bigger.
For sure, dude. And like I said, like ran
Yeah,
it after COVID. It was pretty sick. Like regardless
yeah,
of like methodology, dude, it was just like, yes, you'll experience some sort of benefit and it's pretty fun. But if I'm going to him, right, it's like, yeah, he probably knows a trillion times more about any tendon related thing than I could ever. So it's like just based off of that, you buy into a system of something that he incorporates because underlyingly, he has an idea what's going on. So then every almost exercise, I could give you the same exercises, right? But you're more comfortable
yeah.
because you feel as though Jake's system is revolved around tendon health,
Yes,
repair,
absolutely.
right? And I think that's like what I guess
Yeah,
I'm trying to get to is like you feel comfortable buying into a system because you feel like the person behind it, even if it's a very small sort of scope of practice that they're working on, they can bring in so many things that you'll automatically buy into because I guess intrinsically that they're going to be funneled through this lens that you're trying to get better at or trying to improve
yeah.
or whatever.
He's writing a tendon book. You know that, right?
I don't, but I'm sure
Yeah,
it's going to
he's gonna write a book on
be.
tendons. It's gonna be sick. Watch out, 2024. That's why he went on his road trip around the
Ah,
U.S. No, 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 to get out of writing his tendon book because he started it and he
ah,
was like, I don't want to do this, and so he just started driving around. And I think that is hysterical.
that's sick, dude. Yeah, like I'm sure like stuff like that is going to be once again, it's going to seem like I don't know, man. I don't know how long it's going to be or whatever, but like something that's seems simple to us. It's like, wow, here's all this information, right? Like condensed into something digestible. It's like that dude spent a decade plus probably through all of his learned experiences, research,
Yeah,
readings, all of that. And I think that shit's really cool.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's really sick. And I mean, so Nick Zappala, last I heard, he had TOS and retired. Now he's a professional poker player. Is that
Yeah, I mean, he does play poker. I talked to him.
okay?
He no longer frequents Butters due to their inflated prices. Was the last update I got from him, which is such a Zap thing to say.
Sure.
Um, but yeah, man, like I don't know, people don't really know about him. I know it's like a few people at Tread that trained with him, especially
Yeah.
back in the from the same areas and stuff. Do some other people from Arizona, but man, that's like one dude that definitely flew under the radar because he was so early to stuff. Like one of the OG dudes at X2 writing people's programs, man.
I remember that. I remember that. And um but what's he is he still training guys now? I trained a drive line with him, obviously. That was while he was still training guys through X2. And then
Dude,
he got TOS. And then he and Cole Vila started like and Drew Hall started grinding poker.
that's
And
sick.
then now he comments like once every like 5 months on my Twitter or my Instagram, and it fires me up every time.
Dude, yeah. I got a random text from him the other day. It was like, because I mean he's still training stuff. He goes, yeah, dude, lost a ton of weight on the program I was running, not doing that shit again. Like just out of the blue. And I'm like, just brightens my day. Like I just like get a random text from dude. Like he would write us training programs, the most like rudimentary thing I'd ever seen in my life. For whatever reason it just worked, but he would come with like a handwritten, like on a random side of a printer paper and just give it to you. Like he just wrote it with like a little pen on like a slanted corner and just handed it to you, and
That's
you're just like,
tight.
it's so sick. And I was like,
Yeah.
you definitely wrote this in 10 minutes and it's definitely still going to get me better. And
I mean, not gonna lie, probably anything would have gotten you better.
no, dude, for sure. It's like, you
Yeah.
know, and it's just stuff like that that I was like, I don't know, man. It's like weird to see the dynamic change in baseball social media now. Like it was used to be like pretty bare bones, everyone trying to figure it out now, and then it's more now like, even me at some point falling into the trap to it is like trying to get those clicks, reels to pop off, things like that. But after like consuming so much of it, you just realize like a lot of it's empty. It's hard. It's hard for me to consume a lot of like content now.
Yeah. I mean, I just do what makes me happy, which is why I like this podcast. Might only have 2 episodes. I mean, the first one I didn't even know was happening. And then a couple of my buddies came over here, and I was like, might as well record this. Like we're about to sit down and talk shop for like 2 hours. Like, why would I
Yeah.
not like throw on Audacity and then put it up on Spotify?
Yeah.
And
I don't
then
I don't know what is it.
the
11 episodes, you're the top 1% of like podcasts that ever start. If you can do 11 episodes, I someone's gonna check me on that, but
yeah, I mean, who cares? I mean, like 12 people listened to my first episode, but I gotta
yeah,
imagine that those 12 people are grinders. So shout out if you
yeah,
listen to this. But I mean, it's like I want people that consume my content to have like actual quality. Like I
yeah,
want them like I worked a really long time to like learn stuff, and if you call me like Kier Wenham Flat says like, I mean, this isn't from he got this from somewhere else, but he says that information can either be cheap, it can be good, or it can be or it's hard to get to. Like you can't have them all. So it's either accessible, cheap, or free, or whatever. Like it's if you pay for it and it's good and it's fast, there it is. If you pay for it, it's good and it's fast. If you don't pay for it and it's good, it takes forever. If you like that, those are the two trade-offs.
yeah, yeah. I get you. No,
So I mean, it's good to put out like actual information that people get stuff from.
yeah, for sure. I guess, dude, leading into that, I was thinking about the DB Hammer stuff that you were pumping out.
Yeah,
I guess we don't really have to go through some like the theory of like fatigue, drop off,
yeah,
managing stuff, but it's like the one thing I was thinking about when going through something like a high intent phase with fatigue drop off, right?
yep,
Where do you and there's no fucking answer. And I think I hate asking these questions because they're so easily pinpointing problems and I'm not necessarily bringing solutions to the table. So I feel shitty for like asking questions like this.
No,
without
I
having
asked them all. I mean, the more questions that I get asked of me, like I had like a hour long conversation with Bacon about this yesterday about A-Ray throwing, and he's like poking holes and everything, and I somehow managed to answer half of them. So
yeah,
let's go.
and it's not, I guess the methodology, whatever, I'm not so concerned about, but it's more now the idea of like balancing when we're talking about percent drop offs, things like that, especially how DB laid it out, if you can call it that.
I like
Huge,
the guy your quotes there. Yeah,
right? Like, don't know. Like if
yeah,
you know, tell
no,
me.
yeah.
Where do you start now distinguishing between more of a potential for output in terms of like a neural side of things versus the throwing efficacy from like a mechanical efficiency side
Yeah.
of things,
Okay,
right?
perfect. So I was also thinking about this today. And so the way his programs are designed, like you're either running or you're off. And so like this
Exactly.
is obviously like a track, it's like Bonderchuck. Anything you take from Bonderchuck and apply to baseball, like you need to have like some precursors there. Because Bonderchuck talks a lot about, like discus, shot put, whatever, throwers. But the fallacy with that is like those guys, to quote Zach Bacon for a minute, because I love quoting him, there's no stress on the body while that occurs. Like you can throw a shot all day. Like, I mean, like you don't really get as sore as baseball. Like there's a lot higher, I mean, rotational degrees of baseball throw, a peak at like 7,200 degrees per second, which is ridiculous. And there's nothing like that in shot. And so any program that you take, you have to remember that these like sprinting, like as you're not moving as fast as baseball, and if you view it through a specific lens. And so that's the first thing that kind of goes into it. And then, but to answer your question of movement efficacy, or like when you get to movement, you either have days where you're on, days where you're off. Okay. And so like to take the Charlie Francis high-low training system, you're either high, you're either low intensity, whatever. But Stephen Jones, I I don't know if I'm in or out, but Stephen Jones talks about these mechanical grooving days. And so
Yeah.
depending on where you're at in the program, if so you test, obviously. You test every, 6 weeks, whatever. You test your throwing velo, you test the ball velos, and you test like you see how far the spreads are, which balls you throw the hardest, which balls you throw the slowest. Like if there's like a 10-mile-an-hour gap between the blue and the red, and there's only a 5 between the red and the yellow, like there's something going on there that you need to figure out, right? And so depending on that testing, you figure out, you know, what your initial baseline is. Okay. And so in this program, so like, in this DB Hammer program, you're going to throw on back-to-back days, frequency toleration, where you want to frequently test your max. Okay. But if your baseline for the day is like outside of like 4% of your overall baseline, like you shut it down and then you turn it into a mechanical grooving day. So that
Yeah.
mechanical grooving day is the day where you work on the mechanics at the medium efficiency, and that's technically your output day, but it still allows for some form of CNS recovery.
And I guess that's more, what I was going to allude to next is how are you determining? It's like, I don't want to call it daily readiness, right? But like you said, if you're not within 4% of like what a baseline should look like, or whatever deviation you deem you're going to run this drop off or fatigue kind of threshold or floor at,
Yeah.
how are you determining how much volume they're allowed to build into before saying, okay, you're not going to probably reach the baseline we're at? It's like, how are you determining build up towards that?
So whenever, like, I only would allow two throws to not be above their next maximum. So like if I throw my first throw at 70, and my next one's 71, my next one's 70, 70, like you're done. Like that's it. Like there's no more, like that was like you didn't build towards your max, and like you're at like a certain, like you're building up, and like this is 100, and then you're at set, like say your max is 75, 70, 71, 70, 70, and that's like like a pretty considerable drop off. That's like 5% below. Like you're done throwing.
Yeah. So you're
Now,
allowing them on their own.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
that's, I mean, within, like they start their first throws at 90% or whatever that counts, but like you need to climb pretty much every other throw. But the much more reliable way that I have considered doing this is with arm speed. I think that arm speed is a much like more like sound and resounding way to measure this fatigue because you get towards the fact of like, oh, like like with velo, it's like, oh, did I sequence bad? Did I did I just throw one wrong, whatever, and then velo dips for a couple throws. But like if my arm speed's still there, I'm gonna keep throwing. And
Yeah.
so and arm speed has, it's in the hundreds of degrees or potentially, you're 1,000 plus, depending on what you're throwing. And so like there's like a much wider range that you can be in. And so it's easier to tell like when the trend is heading down versus
Yeah.
like it's just a bad throw.
Yeah. And I think this is where I prefer something like a fatigue. I guess fatigue method is the way, but like for people who haven't read a lot of like the DB work, like probably aren't going to know without listening to your auto reg primer to begin with. But I've found having one constraint drill that's pretty minimal in the lower half has been really easy for me to determine this fatigue, especially with arm speed, just so we're not dealing with the inconsistencies of um sequencing, right? Like
Yeah.
just to be able, and mostly on ramping, but a lot of return to throw guys that I have now are going to be based on one constraint that I know will have relatively consistent or at least reliable arm speed readings. So that way we know what's actually happening in theory in the localized tissues of the arm before progressing anything else. So it's like through the physical demands of training, it'll be a lot of like ballistic work to hopefully get the lower half brought into the picture with like, some of the landing stuff, some of the impacts, all the collisions that are going to be closer to what they'll face when they're getting into like full delivery work or any sort of like
Yeah.
other drill work. But at least for me, I've been able to conceptualize. And once again, there's probably some big loopholes in this that I hope someone kind of like mentions.
Yes.
Um,
Oh, for sure. Like if anyone ever has any questions about this
yeah,
or says that I'm wrong, like please comment and poke holes in it. I would love to know.
yeah, yeah, dude.
Yeah.
That's why it's like I'm able to at least see it in a way where we can assume most of the localized adaptations are happening at the arm if we have
Yeah.
some sort of constraint that allows more so that like torso and arm to work over um like having a roll in, having some sort of like even baby step in, anything along those lines. I felt it extremely hard to keep consistent. When I was
Yeah.
doing throwing back in the, in the facility, I tried doing like single leg throws.
Oh,
I
I'm
thought
so
that,
in on single leg throws. They're so fire.
right, like I had some reasonings from a mechanical side while I was doing them, but as we started getting closer to using the pulse, like me and a few guys there, I realized I could count on some arm speed stuff with those way more because I'm such an inefficient thrower, dude. I'm such a bad mover that like my arm speed fluctuations were just off the walls.
Yeah.
Different plyo balls in any different drill. It's just kind of like a shot in the dark. Um, and I just felt like those, at least for me, those were really the only throws I did at like some sort of lower half constraint where it's only primarily upper body stuff. They seem to be for me like, okay, I can pretty much predict, what the arm speed is gonna look like,
That's
just based
tight.
on, so that's like how I've approached fatigue drop off stuff more so than having a neural sort of stimulus for it. But to your point, I agree that, and I guess this kind of gets into the weeds of it, right? No one really ever trains true ceiling.
No, they
Um,
don't. That's my biggest idea ever, and people just don't get it.
and like, but this is where it's hard for me, right? Tony Holler, regardless of what you think about him, I don't necessarily know any much about
I'm in
programs.
and out. There's a
Yeah,
great YouTube video that you should watch about his Feed the Cats throwing program that has like 40,000 views. I'll send it to you after this.
the throwing program.
No, the
Throwing
speed
program.
Feed the Cats
Okay,
program. Sorry, we're talking
like I
about
said,
throwing.
I'm not one to say like I know what's completely going on under the hood, but I am like basing it off of if you're never training top end outside of competition, right? Um, are you ever training top end if you never get to your in-game velocity? And now this is where I kind of go, I've kind of, I guess, combined a lot of ideas. So
Yeah, absolutely. People are
yeah,
like, "What do I believe, dude? I believe the best stuff from everything I ever consume."
for sure. Right.
Yeah,
Like, so when we look at what Brady does with some of like the theory on localized localized fatigue and being able to prep tissues and be able to
Yeah.
build upon adaptations, right? It's like the idea being you are always ahead of what the demands are going to be when you throw. But
Yeah.
in theory, right, you are training to exceed the demands as much as possible, right? Like in training, you want to prep yourself to throw, say, 90 miles an hour, right? But in a
Yep.
game, your goal isn't to throw 90, your goal is to throw, say, 91, right? So if that's a stimulus your body's never received before, can you ever be in front of the body as much as someone like that claims? Can you ever reach full speed? Like,
My argument is always no. I definitely
exactly,
don't
right?
think that. I mean, I think impulses like I don't like impulses. So this is going to be maybe an old man screaming at cloud take. But like impulses are just a localized depth drop that you can target more. Like, but a depth drop, like me depth dropping 6 feet off a box, like a ridiculous height, like just upper body, like my arm isn't moving at 5,200 degrees per second. Like that's a very specialized like stressor that I'm going to have to eventually incur. Like that I won't get anywhere else besides throwing. That's why throwing is the ultimate exercise.
For sure. And like I think that's where some of my argument comes in too. Once again, you know, whatever principle you want to describe impulses as, I'm not the one to argue for or against it because
Yeah.
I just don't dive into them as much as other people do. But the idea being, if we understand that all of our actions are determined based on what we're planning to run into in future events, right? If we know we're automatic or hitting the end of a collision where it's like a big depth drop, whether it's an impulse, whether something, we can probably assume that the energy dispersion, whatever we're doing, from the midline out is going to look so much different than what we're doing throwing because we're bracing for an impact and we have that sort of
Yes.
idea of what's happening in future events, right? And it's like,
So so Stuart McGill, just to throw a name out there.
ah,
Stuart McGill did a bunch of interesting research. So I'm not about to talk about his spine work because that's completely different. We could
yeah,
if you wanted, but I don't really care.
I don't
But he
care.
did a bunch of interesting research on the double impulse theory. And so the double impulse theory is, for those of you who don't read 80s literature on the spine, is essentially like he was working with boxers and he was noticing that there's two impulses that occur during during a punch. And so the first one is when they go in for the punch, and the second one is a contact, like the whole body reflexively and isometrically contracts so you don't break your hand. And I think that that's really cool, but I don't like. I think that probably the same thing happens at release, if I had to guess, because that's if I want to transfer the most amount of energy into the ball, I'm going to have a really large total body isometric contraction where I'm trying to hold a stiff position. It's like if any of you guys at home have ever thrown a chuck it for your ball for your dog, like right when I want to release the chuck it, like everything stops, and that is a huge like isometric contraction, and I think people kind of forget about that. And I
Mhm.
think maybe Eugene Bleecker on the whip, he would like that.
Yeah, I once again, I see a lot of tidbits. I don't know what goes on in a training system at like, a place like
Yeah.
108.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's not a comment here nor there. I'm just
Oh
saying. I
yeah,
think
no, yeah, for sure. But like going back to that, the whole like, I honestly think it's nonsense where it's like we've cued pimp the throw and things have cleaned up, but diving into it a little bit more, there might be some potential there where it's like people are so focused on later results of like preparing for certain landings in a certain way that things have cleared up earlier to set that sort of action up. And that's why I believe like impulse stuff can be good, can be
yeah,
bad. But even like you had Jared on, at least you had a talk with him. Dude, even he said you kind of have to set them up in a certain way for them to have the efficacy that you're chasing.
yes,
Um, and I don't know that way. I actually, I don't, and like I guess side note, I don't love whatever training him and Brady promote,
yeah,
but I am interested in understanding why they think that way. So I just purchased some of Jared's like one-offs, that collection of
sure.
stuff. And
I
it,
miss Jared. I just love him so
yeah,
much.
dude, like I would be lying to say I'm not intrigued based on a lot of the research he did. So when I trained with Fowler for like over a year, he credited Jared to doing a lot of the research stuff on some of the stuff he was giving me. Um, and and then another one of my friends trained with him. So it's like, if there's two people that I trust that
I trained
are
with Jared as well.
right, okay, yeah, so that are in a
Yeah.
circle, um, it's at least for me worth listening to. And
Yeah.
so, like I said, I don't know what the full methodology or what's going on behind it, so I'm not going to comment on my opinion on it. But like I said, from tidbits that I see, I'm not a fan just on the surface level. But that's why I paid him some stuff to read a little bit more to get a more experience-based thing of what he gives out. So that way I can be less judgmental on, like I said, on like a surface level things of just looking at a social media thing.
Yeah. And I mean, it's not just Jared and Brady, it's also Brett Adams. And I think Brett Adams is pretty smart as
Yeah,
well. Like
yeah,
just to give credit where credit is due, I think those trio of guys are very smart. I think kind of the way that I would try to describe them is maybe with the exception of Brett, like Jared and Brady, like I wouldn't necessarily go to those guys for increasing performance. Like if my view, like performance is very unhealthy for the body, and those
yeah,
guys are trying to get the body as healthy as possible to perform the best it possibly can. And like I think that if you're injured or anything like that, I literally went to Houston to see Jared like a couple times and like sat down with him, and like he was like, why aren't you asking me any questions? I'm like, dude, like there's no way I'll ever be able to like run your programs, like do what you do. Like if someone has this big of a problem that comes to me, I'm just gonna refer them to you. Like
yeah.
I'm out of my depth. Like that's okay. I don't need to know this. Like I'd rather just enjoy a burger and like ask like some very general questions about what you believe. I'm not gonna get into the semantics because I'll never like I'm not on that. And that's okay. I think that like we are more geared towards performance, and that's very, very okay because that's a completely different lens.
Yeah, yeah, and like that's what makes training social media so hard is it's the paradox of people wanting to be elite performers while saying you don't have to hurt while doing it. It's like, yeah, they're not mutually, or I guess the relationship doesn't always have to be there between pain performance, not pain, whatever you want to call performance in terms of like success. But like, I don't know, man. You have to be willing to say like if performance comes first, and that's not at the detriment of health, right? It's like not me saying I love waffles so therefore I hate pancakes. It's really just saying like
Yeah.
I'm trying to perform as best I can,
Yes.
and
Yes.
that, you know what I mean? Like it's
Yes.
the idea of like what do you really want? And I'm not saying, once again, you can't have both, but what I am saying is you better prioritize performance and
Yes.
be able to roadmap as responsibly as you can to get to the level of performance with the level of risk you're inherently willing to take.
And I think that's kind of where the mobility kind of idea, like how much mobility shit should be in your training. It's like maybe mobility isn't a big deal for baseball throwers. I think it's a lot different for throwing the jab, and that's why like it's carried over to baseball, like doing crazy shit. And I mean like you
Yeah,
there is a prerequisite amount of mobility you should have, and like you might train it like a couple minutes a day, but like most of your shit should be like I am who I am. Like let's learn how to throw hard with that. And it's not that I hate mobility, it's just like like we're trying to maximize performance, and maybe some of these compensation patterns that you have and you feel like you're limited by, they're probably helping you.
and I agree, dude. It's like just because I'm saying you only need a certain requisite range to accomplish a task doesn't mean I hate mobility. I think that's what people say. It's like, oh, you don't believe in extraneous amounts of time spent on mobility. Yeah, dude, just like I wouldn't give someone a 2 hour long workout. Like two
Yeah.
questions that I always ask athletes is like, what is your perceived intent on that day? And how long did it take you? Like you will, if you ask almost anyone that, I've been in contact with that, those two will always be on a sheet because I legitimately still have the side of it's like, I don't want you spending 2 hours in the weight room, man. Like I don't want you spending
Yeah.
2 hours on mobility, right? I want you to be able to dose appropriately And I'm not here to tell you what that is. Like, once again, it kind of falls within whatever system you kind of train people under. But you need to be able to dose appropriately to where you still have the ability to go do your skill, do your task, whatever you want to call it, right? And I think that's like where social media gets taken out of context too much, dude. Is like, just because you like something doesn't mean you hate something else. It's not how it works. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Oh yeah.
And just like that, dude, mobility is an easy thing to sell to people because
Oh, it's so easy. Here's a program. I mean, anyone gets better. Like your mobility will get better if you train it.
for
Like,
sure, and like you
yeah,
will, and you can do it anywhere. But I think the hardest part for me to explain to people is that you do not get in extreme ranges by training at mobility at a low intent, if that makes sense, right? Like
yeah, oh yeah,
you still have to train really intensely and push your end ranges so much to get into extreme positions, right?
yeah,
Just like if you're going to squat 600 pounds, you don't fall into a 600-pound squat by training, really consistently for a couple sets a week throughout the course. It's like you're going to push it at some point. And I think that's like the hardest thing to tell people is like, if I gave you an extreme amount of like squatting work versus saying you have to push these end ranges of mobility, you think this is so much less of an impact on like your overall like training economy because it's just mobility. But
yeah,
there's so many implications that go along with opening up new ranges, especially if you are throwing, running, swinging, whatever. It's like people just aren't looking at it through a lens of like, why am I creating these adaptations? What do I really need? And I kind of wanted to post on this, and I'm glad we kind of brought it up. When people talk about becoming a better rotator, are you trying to increase the capacity from a joint function level, a muscle action, tissue health to be able to complete a task better, or are you just trying to complete a task better? Right? Like,
complete
what
a
are you?
task better.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, what are you
Yeah,
really trying to do? It's like, I'm going to rotate better. It's like, what does that mean from a lens of like you just seeing 100 people saying rotate to rotate, rotation is king, whatever? It's like, sure, man, I love the underlying thing that you're talking about, but like, you have to decide, are you trying to improve joint function, muscle action, tissue health, tissue quality, whatever, or are you trying to complete a task better? I am the tightest
yeah.
mover, damn near that I know. I'll go hit a
Nope,
golf
Liam Doolin.
or Liam. Yeah.
Yeah, Liam. I already know it's Liam.
Yeah.
I already know.
Like, dude, like, I'll go hit a golf ball over 200 miles an hour.
Yeah,
But like, once again, it's like I don't have a capacity that people would say lends to being able to rotate better, but I can complete a task like that. So it's like we have to determine what we really want out of our training.
yeah, and I think that kind of goes right hand in hand with pitching mechanics. And it's like, am I going to move better, or am I going to train the ability to throw harder? I guess like the perception of moving better and increasing joint health, like that isn't always good for performance. Just to loop back, like it's like guys that throw harder generally are less efficient. Like look at any of Kyle Wasserberger's stuff on Twitter. Like it's pretty apparent that that's not like you turning your pelvis, like getting more hip shoulder, like might be like yes, it's good to increase obvious mechanic like any obvious mechanical flaws, like not blocking, like hitting a block, like is bad. But generally, like moving better isn't what's going to be the unlock to get you there.
Yeah, and I think that's what I have trouble getting across is why does being a better mover allude to better task completion? They're not like I'm not saying that it may not help, right? But everyone taking it as an absolute
Yes.
is right. Like that's what I'm saying. Like, could it possibly help? Sure. Is it guaranteed to help? No. But I think too many
Yes.
people take it as like a move better, complete the task easier. It's like not necessarily, right? Not saying it
Yeah.
may, but I can for sure say I cannot guarantee that you opening up new ranges, jumping higher, X, Y, and Z is going to elicit better outcomes in a specific task. Like I cannot guarantee that.
Yeah. I mean, so the only thing that I know that increases ball velocity is increased force in the vector of the same vector you're trying to produce velocity in. That is the only thing that increases ball velo. Like jumping higher, like gives you the capacity to potentially transfer more force into that ball. like improving improving mechanics, potential for energy transfer to go into the ball. Like the farther and farther down the mechanics rabbit hole you go, like it's like how much is this going to benefit me putting energy into the ball? And like with your pelvis, like it might not be that much. Like as like I hate to say it, but like unless it's like a big issue, like it might not be limiting you that much. But things like the reason why I think the feet are so important is because they're directly interacting with the ground, and ground reaction force is like the main way that energy is transferred. Like any of the energy flow calculations that are done, like all start with ground reaction force data.
Yeah. And I think that's, I don't know if you've seen my post where it's like everyone talks about proximal and distal referring to midline
Yes.
out, but
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
everyone forgets the global reference point of like where are we connected to reactions in terms of like reaction force. It's like the foot is literally the most proximal to force, right? To like a ground reaction force that our
Yep.
body is like, so like looking at it through that lens, like you said, is like being able to have a more global view on what we're trying to accomplish
Yeah.
is probably better. Like I think the word potential is the best way to put it. I've I've mentioned a few times like the hardest part about being a coach in terms of like developing any sort of weight room capacity, physical capacity, we'll just say physical capacity, or inherent like mechanical improvements, all you can really control is potential. You can't really control like result. I think
Yeah.
that's the hardest part.
So going back to your proximal post, because I thought that that was an interesting idea, and I'm not going to pretend like I got everything that you were trying to say in that video. The way I understand it is the feet, like anything to do with the ground, is the proximal section. So, like when during leg lift, like the back foot is proximal. During foot plant, the front foot is proximal, and the ball is always distal. And so anything that is happening distal is just a reflection of what's going on the ground. That's like the three sentences that I get.
Yeah, and it's more the, I guess not necessarily that it's only a result of what happens on the ground, but it's the idea of everyone talks about like spinal engine theory, and I don't really want to get into it, right? But like when the words proximal and distal are used, it is always referring to midline out, right?
Yes.
But they're only looking at it from a local reference point of like the body, and that's it, right? But like you're standing, so it's like you are from a ground reaction force, right? You the most proximal point
Yeah.
to that reaction force is your foot landing or on leg lift as you're moving down the mountain, whatever, right? So it's like
Yep.
now have to find a way to deliver energy proximally to distally, which would be foot and ball,
Yeah.
or back foot to front foot while being in a position to set up rotation as you're going to deliver the throw.
And I'm with you because I'm so with you on this because the spine, like the spine doesn't drive the throw because that's just not how energy flow happens. Like that's like there is an amount of energy that is generated in the spine. Like I will not take that back. Like it is important. Like the spine does a lot of stuff. It transfers energy from the lower body to the upper body. None of that would be possible without the spine. You're never gonna like you should side bend. You should do a whole bunch of stuff to make sure that that happens. But the way that energy is transferred is it starts at the ground reaction force, and it's transferred up through each joint. Like that is how it happens, and that's how all the calculations work, and that is the number one correlate correlate with ball velocity that exists is energy flow into the elbow, into the forearm at ball release. Which, if you're not dumb, you understand that there's also energy flowing from the forearm into the ball simultaneously.
Yeah.
And so it's pretty obvious that that's our most important calculation. And the the trunk like doesn't really generate energy too much during that.
Yeah. And I think that's like the hard part for me is claiming it the driver, right? Is it important? Yeah, 1,000%. Yeah. But like
Yes.
it's more of the medium of transfer that I view it as than like a driver of something, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah,
like
I also view it as like it's triplanar. I think that that transfer is triplanar. It's not just, transverse. It's not sagittal. It's not frontal. All three things are happening at once. And if you don't train the spine for that three-dimensional transfer, you're never going to get there. And that's why, side bending is so popular right now, is because people forgot about the frontal plane, and they always do. You should definitely be training pitchers to change directions and move in the frontal plane way more than we do. But that's neither here nor there. I'm just saying that that's like kind of the epitome of this argument. And it's like it's happening everywhere. And that's why the spinal engine is important. But to call it the driver, like that, like my that dude has no legs. That's why he's walking like that. Like if he had legs, like normal gait doesn't look like that.
that
Like
was my argument, is like, just because you can complete a task, just like I can complete a task with very limited range of what people would deem what they want to see to be able to rotate efficiently, that is a compensation that he is making to learn how to deliver himself in a forward projection. Sure, that's fucking.
yes,
I won't look like that when I walk.
yeah,
So it's once again, is there validity in a lot of the stuff behind it? Probably. Like I didn't
yes.
read, it's like, yeah,
The book's
but
trash. You don't need to read the book.
I also believe that like people stray far away from, like you said, energy flow and like what it means to develop physical capacity that allows an increased potential for that.
Yeah, I mean, if you care about energy flow, which you should, you care about the ground, and then you care about how much force you put into the ground, because equal opposite reactions. To create ground reaction force, you have to push into the ground so it pushes back. So people kind of forget about Newtonian physics a little bit,
Oh yeah.
and that's
And
that's a little sad.
that's where I started getting more into, I don't want to say archetyping guys of like propulsive dominant and yielding dominant. It's like, yeah, those are like great terms. And the easiest way I could probably get it across on social media, but it's like, I think strategy on how you get into the ground and the timing of things matters a lot that people don't necessarily look at. Like from for example, like I take a lot of like the open biomech data and try to do my own stuff with it. It's like I can recreate some of those like graphs with event-based markers and things like that. I'm looking at change in strategy versus any sort of like objective output, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah,
peaks, peaks, you know, what sort of like frequency some of these things are happening at, if there's any change in literally any shape of any of those signals. It's like, to me, I'm looking more from a subjective viewpoint of strategy than any sort of output based thing right now.